Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's DCMN SCALEup, the marketer's snack box. My name is Eric Vissers, and I'm the Senior Marketing and Business Development Manager at DCMN, the independent growth marketing partner for digital brands and startups. And one of the amazing brands that we've had the honor to help grow is Blinkist. Today, we are taking a deep dive into their podcasting and influencer strategy, presented by the one and only awesome dude, Bobby Richardson. Welcome, Bobby. Glad to have you on board.
Thank you. Glad to be here. What an intro.
No pressure. Just a little T&Cs to our listeners and people who are chiming in as I see the numbers grow. Before we get started, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. And if I like them, I'll bring them up. Otherwise, tough luck. No, just kidding. We'll then have a time for questions at the end. Now, enough about me and all the formalities. Grab your lunch and turn up the volume and start chewing whilst I shift the focus over to Bobby, who will be supplying some delicious brain food. Bobby, you and I, we go way back, prehistoric times. How are you doing?
I know. Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's like we go back to before I worked at Blinkist and before you worked at DCMN, which pre-pandemic, who can even remember such a time? No, I'm good, man. I'm good. It's very warm. I'm in Berlin. It's 30-something degrees. I have a fan on my face, which is hence maybe a slight like windswept look that I'm going for. But other than that, all good. All good.
Excellent, man. I don't have any fans here, but they're probably online tuning into this webinar. So
exactly.
It's pretty hot. Yeah. Are you actually planning on going on holidays?
Hard to say. I was trying to go back to the UK and then everything went wrong. I thought the UK was going to be fine. Everything went wrong. So I think I'm just going to make the most of Berlin for a while.
All right. Cool.
Things are good.
All right, man. So let's go down to business because that's why the most of them are logged in here. Bobby, your background is traditional linear TV, just like me. So here's a question a lot of people must be wondering. A lot of people might be just me, but who knows? How did podcast and influencer marketing land on your desk at Blinkist?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess it's, as you say, like my background's linear TV mostly, but like my remit is offline. Overall. And I mean, it kind of started off because we saw it as sort of like a sponsorships kind of channel, which felt, I guess, more related to offline. And I hope I'm not speaking out of place to say a bit less structured than maybe what some of the more digital marketing channels were used to. So, I mean, we didn't really know exactly where to put it, but yeah, because of that, it felt like it had a relationship to offline. I think also we could see, I mean, one of the things that was quite interesting, I think I said to you when we started talking about this was, I mean, it was a little bit of like a wild, wild west at the start, but we could see the beginnings of a sort of a similar structure to what we've seen offline, with like some networks starting to develop and agencies getting involved. So we started off there and we've just run with it really. But I mean, yeah, we didn't have a perfect answer. Yeah, it's worked out all right though.
So you mentioned that it was like a wild, wild west in the beginning. So you were basically contacting every kind of podcaster or influencer personally, trying to set up deals.
Exactly.
And now it has more structure. You're trying to say that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, honestly, at the start, we were having phone calls with people who, you know, like random people who had a podcast. You know, we'd have a phone call with them and see how they wanted to do it and how much they wanted for a sponsorship and explain how we worked. And yeah, it's definitely there's still a bit of that, and we have like some very close relationships with some of our longer term bigger partners. But I mean, I've compared it to TV a bit in the past with how it's developed, because I think now you're starting to see these sort of networks come through who are representing a collection of podcasts, and then agencies on another level kind of buying from all the networks, right? So I kind of see it. I mean, maybe I'm just simplifying this because this is what works for me, but like I see like the podcasts are almost like TV stations now. And then you have networks that are almost like sales houses, and then the agencies that are sort of across all of it. And then I mean, in a performance marketing setting with it, you optimize your podcasts or your influencers the way that we do with TV stations, I guess. So that's kind of how I see it, but I guess maybe someone coming at it from another angle might see it a different way.
So you mentioned performance. That means, of course, measuring impact is basically the name of the game with every new opportunity that you introduce to your marketing channel mix. And it's definitely an important topic, which requires extra attention since podcasters usually do not offer the opportunity to tell their listeners, click on the banner now, get your product. So how have you gone about measuring the impact on your podcasts and influencer campaigns? And you already mentioned it a bit, but there seem to be some parallels with offline marketing, short and long term. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah. Okay. So firstly, on the measurement side, the way that we do it, which I think is similar, like most people tend to either do it through promo codes or landing pages. We use landing pages. So then everyone we work with has a unique landing page, and we track the impact through that. There's no perfect science to it, but we think we see about 50% of the direct impact through those landing pages. And then the other 50% we think comes through other traffic forms, which we've kind of tried to analyze, like based on organic uplift and things like that. And I guess that also has a relationship to offline marketing, right? This is something that we're constantly talking about with TV. You know, how do we measure the direct impact? How do we measure the like halo effect or whatever you want to call it? And also, I guess the other thing we've kind of done, I guess is similar to offline, is we have sort of different objectives for the partners. So and I think this kind of comes down to the fact that and this is something else that I think is worth knowing for everyone, the performance of these partners can differ hugely. And we have some partners that deliver huge return on investment, and that kind of allows us to then spend some money on some larger, I guess more like brand awareness partners, which may not have, I mean, sometimes they do also have great ROI, you know, but sometimes we also feel like they're a good thing to align the brand to, or we hear anecdotally that a lot of people have heard about us through that. So we feel like it's having an impact that we're maybe not seeing. So yeah, it's all about kind of the the overall performance. And as long as the overall performance is on goal, we can kind of set up some different objectives within that. And again, yeah, that's quite similar to offline, and probably it comes from my offline background of like, we buy big TV stations for reach, and then we do more performance on the smaller ones. And yeah, so that's kind of how we set it up.
Interesting. This actually sparks like a little brain fart in my mind. But before I go into that brain fart, I would like to, of course, inform our fellow listeners and viewers and lunch chewers, whoever you are, that there's a friendly call to action. Haha, beat that, podcasters. Our call to action to post your questions in the Zoom chat box, and we will go through them at the end, provided, of course, Bobby and myself, if we like the questions or not. If you want to ask about our hairstyles or whatsoever, leave that for another moment. But now let's focus on the topic at hand. So the brain fart that I've been trying to ponder on, because you are actually, the way you're describing the whole measurement ability, but also how you book podcasting and influence, you're using some sort of what we use at TV, if I'm not mistaken, a clustering. We want to make sure like you have the reach, yes, you have the volume, you have the frequency, and you also have the awareness. So I guess frequency kind of drops out. Is there another kind of metric that you use to evaluate what kind of level the podcaster or influencer is?
Yeah, I would say the way that we probably cluster, because ultimately, like, our objective is that our overall podcast or influencer budget is on goal. So we have a group of, we probably have a few clusters. We have a group of podcasts or influencers that we know are going to perform, and we run them every month, maybe even twice a month, 3 times a month. There's some people we do multiple times a week, and we know they're going to perform, and that's kind of like the volume drivers. We also then would have some bigger ones which drive awareness, although like we still have performance goals for them, and if the performance is particularly weak, like we'll turn them off, and maybe in some lower seasonality times we'll turn them off. And then we also kind of, I guess, have our test cluster, which is maybe a little bit different because our test cluster kind of has both these objectives, right? Like, so we're looking within, and that sits within our normal budget. So the idea is that the whole budget is on goal based on like whatever goal we determine, and the test budget is part of that. It's not like our normal budget's on goal and test outside. So yeah, then that test budget, we're kind of analyzing that on a case-by-case basis as well. Like if we're seeing a lot of traffic come through, but it's not converting, we would have a different hypothesis to no traffic, and also impression wise, you know, I mean, again, this kind of comes back to that sort of Wild West thing I talked about, but we, you know, you don't have things like Nielsen with TV for impressions, right? Here. So our impressions are entirely based on what podcasters tell us their impressions are. So we have to trust that to a degree, but there's also an element of that we can use. And then we kind of move them from the test cluster into these kind of, I would say like performance versus reach clusters. But yeah, I think within the performance cluster, we have some that are more frequent than others. But yeah, I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that you use frequency in a TV sense where you have to have 3 or 4 runs to get the message across, especially because a lot of our podcast ad reads are 2 minutes long. You know, I think it's enough for people to start to get a good impression of our product.
2 minutes long. They must really love Blinkist. I mean, you usually go on the market and they would actually sell you like 60 seconds, but 2 minutes, that means that they're extra authentic when they actually get the message across.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what works best. Like, and this is the thing. Like, a lot of the people we work with are people who have approached us about wanting to work together because they love the product, and it's absolutely what works best in both podcast and influencer. Like authenticity of the recommendation, because I think it's one of the few areas where there is a genuine recommendational aspect to it. Like, people will refuse to work with people they don't want to. People will come to us to work with us. We have to be careful who we work with because of the impression, because we have to, I mean, because of the content on the product, we have to remain quite neutral. So whilst we are sponsoring people to promote us, like there's definitely a genuine sense of like authentic recommendation and partnership, and we see that come through in the results. Like the more depth there is to that relationship, the better the results, almost always. And it almost, I mean, it tends to sort of exceed CPM as a KPI. You know, we can have really good performance on stuff that has much higher CPM, really bad performance on low CPM stuff.
So you're actually also tapping into their loyalty. When you choose your talents, so to say, you actually want to create brand ambassadors out of them, or
absolutely
brand warriors. What's in your top of the mind? Just give me just a rough figure. How long is the longest relationship that you have with a podcaster so far?
Oh, I mean, there's a few people we've been working with since almost we began doing it, you know, which is now over 2 years ago. Yeah, I mean, we've been working with Jay Shetty in the US for a long time. We've been working with David Pacman over there for a long time. We've been working with Tim Gabel in Germany for a long time. Most of those since we began. Yeah, and it's actually amazing how much a lot of them manage to maintain the performance level. You know, you'd think that once David Pacman's viewers had heard us 20 times that they would stop reacting, but I mean, maybe it's to do with the influx of new viewers they get. But yeah, we've managed to keep up performance, working sometimes, like we work at least every week with David Pacman, and it still performs well, you know.
Awesome. So you're already sharing like some surprising takeaways. Is there anything else when it comes to your strategy or source of inspiration, even for other channels? Are there other channels that you're venturing into after having learned that, hey, podcasting actually works and influencer as well?
Yeah.
What are you thinking about, without of course spreading the vibes here or unleashing like new insights, but are there other channels that you're currently looking into?
No, it's a good point though, because we've done some of this with attribution. And I mean, the thing is, I don't know, maybe not everyone knows a huge amount about Blinkist, but I mean, fundamentally, we're becoming increasingly an audio content product. More and more of our users are using our audio feature. And I mean, this was also part of why we went into the podcast area. And I think part of why we've seen such success in podcasts. And then we kind of thought, all right, well, where can that take us? And we're now doing radio as well, and actually using the same structure as we use for podcast, right? So in the past, we were doing radio in a much more traditional way. And then because of what we've done with podcasts with attribution, we applied a similar attribution to radio. So now when we work with a radio station, we give them a unique landing page and we track their performance through the unique landing page there as well. So it's come both ways, right? Like I've used like the offline background into this and then this back into offline, and it all goes in a big circle. And I mean, I guess to give some numbers, we think that where we think maybe half of the traffic from podcast comes through the landing pages, we think it's maybe more like a third to a fifth through radio, which is probably just the nature of the medium. But I mean, it's still better than what we had before in terms of optimizing radio. I mean, previously we did things like measure the uplift in a certain area when we run radio, which gives you some idea of overall performance, but it's hard to optimize. You can do things like an 8-minute attribution window, but it becomes a gray area, right? When you're using that for TV and radio. So that's also been super useful. So yeah, it's all coming full circle.
Wow. Introducing radio. So much for video killed the radio star. So radio revival, my friends, radio revival. Tap into that. For members of our audience who might now want to dive into podcast and influencer opportunities, what advice would you give them for getting started?
Sorry, you froze for a second there. Can you say that again?
I did it on purpose.
Okay. So, you're asking what advice I would give someone to get started?
Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I would say, firstly, one of the good things about podcast and influencer as well is that you can start quite small. I mean, we could debate this, but I think with something like TV, there's an argument that you need a certain budget. Not so much with podcast and influence, I don't think. I think you can see an impact on an individual basis. I would say be prepared to be open-minded. A lot of what we thought would work for us doesn't. A lot of what we didn't think would work for us does. I mean, I think it's really important to make sure you're working with people who have this authentic connection with your product, but also like, don't just think that only the obvious stuff will work. Don't think that only the cheap stuff will work. Certainly specific to podcasts, we're very focused on trying to do these authentic reads with podcast hosts. We're not really doing so much in the sort of dynamically inserted programmatic buy yet. But yeah, give stuff a try. I think also, I would say the performance will never be amazing at the start, and like you have to commit to it for a while and learn. But yeah, you have to go quite deep into your learnings, you know, like don't just sort of go, okay, we did some lifestyle influencers and it didn't work, so lifestyle doesn't work for us. Because when you get into it and you see, okay, well, this person did this kind of read and this person did that, you start to see themes that sit beyond verticals. So I would say don't get too focused on verticals as well.
And what about any advice on how involved one should get with the creative part? Do you get
good question.
Or do you allow like the channel to bring across that message by themselves?
Yeah, we try not to get too prescriptive and too involved. And I mean, we have a little bit more sort of creative freedom here, I guess, because it's sort of a co-branded thing, right? So we don't have to have things be too strictly attached to our branding. And a lot of influencers, like there's a reason they've picked up so many followers, right? They do good creative stuff and we don't want to stifle that. So we have a briefing document that has quite prescriptive things in it, but we're very clear that we want to leave that open for them to run things how they wish, really. I mean, obviously, if there's anything too controversial, we have to be careful, but it's not been a huge problem for us so far.
All right.
People seem to care more about the content we're attached to than how people talk about the product, I think.
Definitely. That's some really good insights and also some good takeaways. So to all the listeners, how do you like them apples? Anyways, let's move on to the Q&As. Holy smokes, guys, slow down with the questions, all right? Let me just go evaluate if I like them or not, okay? So first question, oh, nice. what are your thoughts on codes versus landing page links to track success?
Interesting. Yeah, good question. I would say there are other elements involved, right? So we also use an incentivization, which usually it's like 25% off for listeners with our partners. That obviously has an impact, right? So I don't have exact foolproof data to say one works better than the other in a certain way. We're pretty happy with the landing page approach. The good thing with the landing page approach is that our partners can use a link, whereas like usually with a code, it's a copy and paste, or maybe you do a combination where you have a link with a code that takes you to almost like a landing page with the code pre-filled. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but yeah, we're pretty happy with our landing page approach. I think it depends on your product, depends on your setup. We don't have a setup for promo codes that work seamlessly with our partnerships. So we're pretty happy with our approach. And we usually use pretty snappy landing page links. So it's like, it can be blinkist.com/DCMN. So my feeling is that we're happy with our approach. I think codes also work great if you do it right. But yeah, you have to make sure either way that you incentivize it properly so that people have a reason to do it and not just if they remember.
Awesome. So this is actually quite linked to the question just now. Do you always send people to the website landing page, or do you also tell them, hey, go and download your app on the App Store or Google Play?
Nah, for us on partnerships, it's always to the landing page. Yeah, because that's where the incentivized discount is. And I guess that would be an advantage to doing like a code would be through the app. People could then do codes, but yeah, I mean, for our sort of centralized tracking, it's been much easier to do it through landing pages. Yeah.
All right. So next question, man, these are good. There's some really technical, but I'm going to try to get this across to you. Do you see media channels as being generally either suited for branding purposes or for performance purposes? For example, TV for branding and banners for performance. Or do you think you can do both branding and performance in each channel depending on the objective?
I mean, I have some pretty strong views on some of this in general. Like I think, and we could get into this for a while, I'll try not to. I don't necessarily just subscribe to with all due respect to this sort of simplification of like branding versus something else. Like I think ultimately for a business like Blinkist with the size we are, like we don't, even when we're trying to build our brand, like it's not necessarily like it's not so I can go and tell my mom, hey, we're famous, like we're always trying to put a business impact on that. And so I think we try not to hide behind this kind of like, oh, that's just for branding, but absolutely some marketing channels will have a certain impact on branding or brand awareness or brand trust. And we do obviously see that in TV through brand tracking surveys. For podcast and influencer, I think one of the great things about it is that it does both. Like we see performance, but I think the authenticity of the recommendation also shows a sort of brand trust and a brand legitimacy as well. So yeah, I get that like different channels can have different objectives, but ultimately we're trying to acquire customers, let's be honest. And I think sometimes it's easy to back away from one in the other. But yeah, luckily I think in podcast and influencer, we get a bit of both in there, and that's been great.
It's all about playing the game of patience, people.
Yeah.
So whatever your objective is, make sure it's realistic.
Yeah, just because you can't see like the impact necessarily straight away or as quickly from say TV doesn't mean the only thing you're doing is building brand awareness. I think it's a bit more complex than that.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Next question. Thanks for the talk. Yeah, you're welcome. I hope you enjoy it. How does Blinkist find the podcasts they want to advertise on? Are there any process or tools you are currently using to help make your decision process, or you just go and look around on the internet?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's, I think, also part of the wild west of podcast advertising. Particularly at the start, we were just like, we were looking up iTunes podcast rankings and then going onto their website and being like entering a contact form and being like, hey, are you looking for partners, you know? So yeah, that was how it started. I think now it's and as far as I mean, in influencer, there's more tools. There's a few tools that you can use to kind of like identify influencers. Podcasts, we don't have so many, but since this kind of like network thing has been established, it's become a lot easier. So now the networks that we've been working with will present the podcasts that they have, some demographic detail, a bit more about the podcast. And that's mostly how we find our stuff now, through networks and agencies and their kind of catalog of people they represent, basically. But at the start, it was Google.
Yeah, I mean, hey, if these agencies are built because they are trying to solve a certain problem, then tap into that, get smart.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, I suppose. It's like we're very Berlin based, but we have a big customer base in the US. And I mean, I know some American podcasts, but I'm nowhere near positioned to sort of have an extensive view of every podcast in America at this point. So you have to kind of use those international networks and agency connections as well.
All right, man, like the questions keep coming. It's like, I don't know, someone opened the floodgates.
Brilliant.
And I'm getting overwhelmed. So I'm really like trying to select what would be the right question. So eeny, meeny, miny, mo. So, what was your experience with launching your own podcast? Simplify versus running ads on other influencers' podcasts. What do you find the most challenging? Boom.
Interesting. It's a good question, to be honest. We keep those quite separate at Blinkist. So Simplify, I don't work on that, and I don't work that closely with that. I mean, we work with each other on content and stuff, but like they do their thing, we do ours. We've spoken about what works for us in podcast advertising, but I don't work on that, so I can't speak specifically to like the challenges they have promoting it as a podcast or anything. It's interesting though, because when I recruit for jobs in this area, sometimes the idea of like podcast marketing manager, people aren't sure if it's like marketing us in other podcasts or marketing our podcast. So I get people thinking they're applying for jobs with Simplify. But no, I don't work that closely on it, so I can't talk too much to their challenges, unfortunately.
Okay, then my next question would be, or not mine, I'm reading it from the screen, would be, of course, is there a seasonality behind running podcasts and also, of course, influencers in this case?
Not pricing wise, as far as I've seen. I mean, there will be some times when things are popular. For example, last year was a very political year. The prices started to rise on some of the political stuff. But no, it doesn't have a sort of like pre-Christmas and summer, like January and summer media seasonality. One of the things I would say, and I actually, probably should have touched on this earlier, but like also with podcast and influencer, you don't see all the impressions straight away, right? So like we use a 6-week model to judge our impressions. And because of that, we don't budget seasonally so much. Because if you spend like, say 100K one month and then 0 the next month, and then 100K the month after, you've got a heavy overlap from the previous month on the performance. So we tend to grow bit by bit rather than having off months and on months, and it kind of skews things a bit too much.
Do you also do something with events like Black Friday or back to school or?
Yeah, we do. And increasingly so, particularly with longer term partners where they've spoken about us a lot and we feel like we need to keep the message fresh. So when we have promotions or when we launch new product features, it's a great place to do it because of these like 2-minute reads, you know? Whereas on some of the digital channels, we'll say, okay, we want to test this new product feature in our marketing. That comes at a cost of your bread and butter. Whereas in podcast and influencer, we can add it in and still kind of maintain the stuff we know works.
All right, cool. So to our fellow chewers and listeners, we're going to enter into the last, well, we're not going to enter, we're just going to question the last question. So whatever, man. Bobby, in your own opinion, how you derive things. What's the next big thing in the world of audio?
I would say I think we're going to get increasing improvements in tracking and attribution. I know that's kind of a boring answer, but I think podcasts aren't going anywhere. Radio's good. I'd do a Blinkist plug and say our new shortened podcast, Shortcast, is the next big thing in the world of audio. But
Whoa.
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 No, but yeah, no, but I think the attribution and tracking amongst all that, right? I mean, and again, this comes from like what I'm doing in some of the more traditional offline channels, and what we see coming through from some of the agencies, that we're getting a lot better at tracking who's actually downloaded the podcast, when they've listened to it, and then attaching them to a more specific lead rather than just through discount codes. And I think that in terms of what we're talking about today, that's probably the thing that's going to take us to the next big step, I would say.
Did everyone write this down? Because there were some some really valuable value bombs dropped right here in this session. So thank you very much, Bobby, for sharing your thoughts. Before, of course, we wrap it up in a whatever. We would love to hear about what podcasts or the podcast a marketer would listen to. What are your favorites at the moment?
Oh, that's a good question. Some of the ones that I really like that we've worked with, like No Such Thing as a Fish in the UK, is cool. I really like that. So that if anyone knows the show QI, it's like a quiz show in the UK. It's by a bunch of people that did that. I really like them. Also, our sort of like our pride and joy for a while in the sort of more branded stuff was Pod Save America, which is a US podcast that's done by some people from the Obama administration. And we had our sort of big moment when one of our ads ran while they were interviewing Obama. So it was like a Blinkist ad followed by Barack Obama's voice, which I think was probably like peak of my podcast advertising. So yeah, I like those. Yeah, probably the main ones.
Nice. For our listeners, in case you're interested about mine, mine would be How I Built This, the mobile user acquisition show, and Everyone Hates Marketers. Yep, that's pretty much it. So this wraps up another great marketer snack box. I hope you all finished your food. And yeah, the snack box already had some really insightful value bombs, as I already mentioned, provided by the awesome dude, Bobby Richardson from Blinkist. So to all your listeners and viewers, please leave a like, a subscribe. Just kidding, man. There'll be more announcements coming in the near future. So keep an eye out for DCMN updates. Until then, stay sane, stay safe, and wash your hands. Bobby, peace out, man.
Thanks very much. See you later.